right, I think let's start. Just to say welcome to the launch of the Centre for Early Childhood Development's Advocacy and Social Justice Unit. Thank you so much for being here today and to join us. My name is Jessica Blom and I am the Operations Manager at CECD. I'm just going to share my screen, so bear with me for a second. Okay, great. Hopefully you can all see that. But yeah, just to say welcome to this very exciting initiative. We're so happy that you're all able to join us here today. Just in terms of today's event, we'll be doing a bit of housekeeping. I'll do a brief overview of the Centre for Early Childhood Development for those of you who don't know us. Eric Atmore, our director, will then do a presentation, overview of our advocacy thinking and work, and then Yusra Ainai, who manages the unit, will look at our strategies, what we have done so far, and also look at the focus of our future work. And then we will have time at the end for a Q&A session. So in terms of housekeeping, Inyatelo and Jacques from Inyatelo have been so wonderful and offered to help us, and they've been hosting this event for us, and Jacques has been providing us with technical support. So he's just going to quickly go over housekeeping for the event.
There we go. Thank you very much, Jessica. If I'm just going to share my screen ever so quickly. There we go, folks. From my side, I just want to take you through some housekeeping issues, just some things to keep in mind while we are running this webinar today. So the first thing for us to do is just to start looking at setting up our screens, because we're going to have folks presenting. It's just easier to set up our screens, just make it nice so that we can see the person presenting and see the presentation better. So the first one that we want to do is we want to set our systems to speaker view. So if we're going to look at the entire screen, we will then see that on the top right-hand corner, we've got something that says speaker view or gallery view. Now, if you can just click on that to say speaker view, then it will be set up for you to be able to just have the best setting for this kind of webinar that we're doing. Sometimes you will also find that you will have blocks on the side of your screen showing folks not running their cameras at the moment. What you can do to take that away is if you go to the bottom left-hand side of your screen, you will see there's a start video button. On there, there's a little arrow that shows up. And when you click on that arrow, it takes you through to video settings. Once you click on video settings, it will then take you to a section that says hide non-video participants. This would mean that anybody who is on the system that is not showing a screen or isn't supposed to be there, they will then be removed like that. Then the next one is to ask questions. If there's any questions coming through, you will have a look at the bottom of your screen. There's a little chat function. And in that chat function, you will just click on that. And that will open up the chat screen. And you can feel more than welcome to just add all your questions in there. And then we will field the questions as we go on or at the end at the Q&A session. Also, there's a little reaction button at the bottom of the screen that you can just click to give us a wave or a thumbs up while we're going through this. Then please remember, while we're going through the webinar, to mute the microphones and switch off those cameras. It's, it takes out any background noise, it takes out any unnecessary videos, but most importantly, it takes data. So for folks who don't have all the data or don't have the best equipment that they are working on, it just saves them bandwidth that they can also enjoy the webinar. And then lastly, from my side, please remember this webinar is being recorded for internal purposes. And that's it from me. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Jacques. Okay, wonderful. Okay, so just to give a very brief overview of the Centre for Early Childhood Development, for those of you who don't know us, we are a non-profit organization that started in 1994, and we are committed to putting young children first by ensuring quality early childhood development for our country's youngest citizens. From what we know in terms of the research, early and appropriate interventions for children at risk can mitigate the effects of poverty and inequality and enable vulnerable young children to really grow and develop to their full potential. Our mission is to increase the capacity of individuals, organizations, and communities in delivering ECD programs throughout South Africa. And we do this through a range of different programs and services. So just a very, very brief overview. We have what we call our integrated ECD program. We run family outreach programs. We do a lot of research into the field of early childhood development. We have also started the Cape Town Museum of Childhood, which is a flagship project of CECD. And we also run a lot of training and workshops and research into the field of leadership and management in the sector. If you would like to find out more about all of the projects and the work that we're currently doing, please visit our website, which is www.cecd.org.za. Next up, Eric Admiral will be talking about the overview of our advocacy thinking and approach. Eric, it's over to you.
I can't get rid of this.
Eric, you're on mute, but we can see you.
Right. Good morning, everybody. Jessica, thank you very much. My task is to give an overview of our advocacy thinking and our approach going forward. I said to Jessica, I'll take 12 minutes, and I intend to stick to that. Since 1994, when we started, we've been a vocal and prominent voice in the early childhood sector, along with many people who are on this webinar, most notably Mary-Louise Samuels. We've been part of ECD policy initiatives for government, and we've done a huge amount of advocacy and lobbying work. Building on this, since 2020, we've been working on a large-scale national ECD movement, focusing on advocacy and social justice. You will know that in mid-2020, we had some huge litigation victories, and Elizabeth Van Wyk from Van Wyk and Associates was critical to that, central to that, and she is on this webinar. What happened was that government was forced, the Department of Social Development was forced to reopen ECD centers when the Social Development Minister did not want to. And then in October 2020, Van Wyk and Associates and our advocate in Pretoria, Annelies Lawrence, they were back in court, forcing government to pay the ECD subsidy, which they had cynically and purposefully stopped. the High Court ruled that the Social Development Department has to pay the subsidy. Government has appealed that, so it's still before the courts. So since October 2020, driven by those litigation victories, we were a friend of the court in the first one, and we were an applicant in the second one. We've structured this initiative, and we've employed staff members under the leadership of Yusra Ehrenreich, who herself is an attorney, to establish an advocacy and social justice unit, which we announced quite a while ago and which we're now launching formally today. So I'm going to set out our thinking. It's important at the outset to say what we are not. We're not starting another organization. We're not a single issue ECD campaign, such as tackling the children's bill or vaccinations for ECD workers. Those are single issue campaigns which form part of a much broader social movement. Essentially, we aim to radically transform ECD in South Africa. And in 2 mass protests last year and earlier this year, thousands of people have come on board. And everybody on this webinar, probably everybody on this webinar was part of that. We had people all over the country showing government that what they are doing in ECD is inadequate and uncaring. And the reason for this is that as a sector, we've needed to raise our voices. You know, we went silent for 12 to 15 years. And a very dear and close colleague of mine, Renee King, and myself spoke about this. And the energy had gone out of the sector, and the sector had lost its voice. And the days of people like the late Roy Padiachi, the late Daniel Plaatjes, Joyce Matube, Saul Muthayan, Renee King, that activism was gone. And it has to be, and it has been re-established, certainly in the past year, since those 2 litigation victories. So lasting change will only happen when people like ourselves feel the urgent need and take sustained action. We need to rethink how we do ECD activism. And in our view, it's everybody's responsibility to do this. This is not a one organization-led movement. Everybody has to be involved. If we are going to improve the situation for young children, we have no choice but to speak out comprehensively and powerfully, and speak truth to power. One of the things we've asked ourselves is, if not us, then who? If not now, then when? Now, I couldn't find an authentic source for that, but if we as a collective sector do not do something now, nobody else is going to. And if we don't do it now, our children will continue in the appalling circumstances that they find themselves. If we want action, we have to challenge the status quo. We have to get our collective voice out there, and we have to get the ECD sector active and engaged. We must take our message to politicians, to officials in government, to business, trade unions, communities, and to parents. But to do this, we need to learn how to participate in political action around early childhood development. This is an essential part of our democracy. We must all be empowered to speak up without fear or favor. We need to raise our individual voices and our collective power with the goal of quality ECD for all across South Africa. In doing so, we need a mass of activists. ECD principals, teachers, governing body members, academics, writers, researchers, and many others. We must grow a nationwide swell of ECD activists who can work at local, provincial, and national levels. If I look at the people on this webinar, there are activists here who've been in the field for 30 years. I think of Colleen Horswell Daniels, who's led huge ECD activism in the sector for many, many years, and other people as well, lots of other people. In the past 2 decades, and until recently, there's been little activism. The ECD sector voice has been silent, and our collective voice has not been significant, with only a few speaking out about the injustices in ECD. I'm still waiting for one ECD organization or national body to condemn children, preschool children, falling into pit latrines and drowning. Still waiting for an organization to condemn the wife of an MEC in the Eastern Cape who created over 100 fake ghost grade R teachers, and not a word was said about it. So we can't allow those things to happen in a democracy. I think that notwithstanding the South African government signing the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child and signing the African Charter on the Welfare of the Child, and notwithstanding our Bill of Rights, which reflects child rights in our Constitution, and notwithstanding the Cabinet approving an excellent national integrated ECD policy in December 2019, it's still clear that ECD is not a priority in South Africa. You know, politicians can kiss babies at election time, and with the local elections coming up, we're going to see a lot of that. That is not enough. We need to do much, much more. More than 5.5 years since the ECD policy was approved. In fact, vulnerable children are now worse off in June 2021. Working together, we can make a significant impact and change possible. And from the litigation of 2020, we have learned that we can have an impact, but there needs to be a significant shift from apathy to activism, and we still have a long way to go. And that's the reason, one of the reasons why we set up the Advocacy and Social Justice Unit, to remove that apathy and to make everyone an activist. We need to use our anger and our disappointment to focus on an uncaring government as a rallying call to make a radical difference. We need strong political action and leadership of the ECD sector. That's a necessity. We can no longer say, as many do, that ECD policy is good, but implementation is poor. We have to ensure the proper implementation of ECD and related policies. It was the late Professor Kaida Asmal, who was Education Minister from 1999 to about 2004, who said to me that it's the squeaking wheel that gets the oil, and that government does not listen unless there's noise. That came from a cabinet minister, from the Minister of Education, and we have to make that noise. We've been doing it for the past 8 to 9 months, and it's been done by ECD workers on the streets, and it's been done vociferously, and it is starting to work. But we can no longer sit passively. We have to get started now. And in years gone by, the rallying cry, as many people would know, was Sekunjalo. Now is the time has come. So we are at an historical moment where we can take ECD forward and where we all become ECD activists. We also have to set the ECD political agenda. No longer can we allow politicians to kiss babies only at election time, and for incompetent public officials to tell us what to do and how to do it. If we don't raise our voices now, we will remain voiceless. It is through activism that we can make a difference. As a movement, and remember there are estimates of 180,000 ECD workforce across the country. That's a significant number of people who are contributing not only to the education system, but to the economy of the country. As a movement, we must knock on doors throughout South Africa. We must meet with government, with business, with trade unions, with civil society, and with local communities and parents. So how do we start to build this activism? We do this person by person, step by step, and we start in our homes, our organizations, our churches, our sports clubs, our communities, with street committees, with ward committees, and we build up nationwide action. What we have in common is that we reject the way that things are in ECD at the moment. We can learn a lot from a young 17-year-old girl, climate activist Greta Thunberg. Greta Thunberg started a global movement on climate change. And on a world platform, on a global platform, she asked global leaders, how dare you? How dare you? And we need to say to our government, how dare you any longer not put young children first in this country? We also need to ensure that as we move through this process, we are not captured. There are elements in the early childhood sector that have been captured, that are scared to speak out, or that are in cozy relationships with government for various reasons. We cannot allow the early childhood sector to be captured. Being an ECD activist is going to be difficult. It will be complex. We will be attacked. There will be a backlash. But we have a noble cause, and we must not be fearful of officials or threats. We owe them nothing. We must not be afraid of being unpopular. There's no higher calling than advocating for young children. If we are of the view that things can be better for young children, then it is essential that every one of us believe that we can do it, and that collectively we are the right people to do it. I'm heartened that from yesterday, when we got involved in the fact that ECD workers falling under social development are not going to be vaccinated, that an organization got together and wrote to the Minister of Social Development. We then added support by turning that letter into a press release, into a press statement, and distributing it. And since yesterday, there have been about 6 television programs which highlighted the plight of ECD workers and how they have cynically been excluded from vaccination. There have been about 8 radio interviews. So it can be done, but it can only be done collectively. No single person, no single organization can do it by themselves. In conclusion, I want to say that social justice requires political action. If we commit to acquiring the ECD knowledge and information that we need, and if we are able to plan campaigns and programs, and if we fearlessly put these into action, We can bring about change in the interests of young children. This is how we will change ECD in South Africa for all children now and for generations to come. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Eric. I am just going to share my screen again. Okay, just while that's loading, just a reminder to please put any questions that you have or any thoughts in the chat so we can pick it up when we do the Q&A session. But next, Yusra will be talking a little bit more about our advocacy and social justice unit.
Thank you, Jess, and good afternoon, everyone. As Eric and Jess have said, I manage the Advocacy and Social Justice Unit at CECD. So in the context of Eric's overview and the organization's thinking behind having a specific formalized unit, I'll now provide more detail on the Advocacy and Social Justice Unit at CECD. At the outset, I would like to highlight our vision and mission, which builds on the organization's long-standing vision of developing a world that puts young children first, and then more specifically, having South Africans understand and then act upon the importance of early childhood development. The mission of CECD's Advocacy and Social Justice Unit is therefore to inspire action on early childhood development. Next slide, please, Jess. So the way in which we would do this at CECD and collectively with the sector is through a range of different advocacy strategies, which would include both reactive advocacy as well as proactive planned advocacy. It involves popular education and rights education, which is aimed at empowering ECD principals, teachers, and parents to know their rights and how they can be protected, as well as including advocacy around the content and implementation of ECD policies. There's also advocacy strategies around legal advocacy and litigation, where if necessary, going to court and taking on strategic cases that can effect long-term ECD reform, as well as offer legal support to ECD centers and individuals. There's also room for lobbying work where we engage with government at a national, provincial, and then also local level, as well as make written submissions on bills or before Parliament in the ECD sector. And importantly, a big part of an advocacy strategy is consultation and engagement and feedback and input from civil society, many people who are in this webinar today, as well as ECD practitioners, and communication to the sector and the rest of South Africa through using social media platforms as well as traditional media. We'll also work with and strengthen existing coalitions and campaigns. As Eric said, it's a job for everyone. Everyone can be an ECD activist, and at CECD, we also find it important to collaborate and support other campaigns. It's about amplifying the voices on the ground in an intrinsically non-exploitative way, where you elevate and communicate these ECD sectors to the world, and importantly, mobilizing and unifying this collective voice in the ECD sector around key demands and campaigns, which includes direct action and various calls to action, such as protesting. Next slide, please, Jess. So there are, well, as you can see, there are various ways to advocate for ECD, and different approaches can be taken. The advocacy strategies we choose to adopt will definitely vary depending on the campaign as well as the objectives of the specific initiatives, taking into consideration what is most effective, what is constructive, and this will always be quite flexible as well as multi-layered. Then, to give a brief summary of the advocacy work done so far up until now, as Eric mentioned at the beginning, CECD was involved in 2 court cases. The first one, which was last year, when there was a court case on opening up ECD centers during alert level 3 of lockdown. This case was in response to DSD's failure to give any direction to the ECD sector on opening ECD sectors, and so DSD was taken to court. On the 6th of July last year, Judge Fabricius held that there was nothing preventing ECD centers from opening under alert level 3, and that they could open immediately, provided that they complied with the prescribed health and safety measures. In that court case, CECD wasn't an applicant. We were an amicus or friend of the court, where we provided expert evidence or advice on ECD. And then on the 8th of August last year, we were one of the applicants to launch a court case on payment of subsidies. This case was against the Minister of Social Development, as well as the MECs, and their failure to pay subsidies during lockdown. And as Eric said, we're currently at an appeal process, because the Minister of Social Development, as well as the MECs, they've appealed the judgment that ECD centers should immediately be paid subsidies, whether they are open or closed. So this decision has been appealed, and it's sitting at the Supreme Court of Appeal waiting to be heard. Then non-litigious angles and not necessarily legal advocacy were involved in the ECD Employment Stimulus Relief Fund. CECD and many people in the sector, including people in this webinar, have applied sustained public pressure on DSD, the presidency, National Treasury, regarding the missing money, and then the application process, the verification process, and now finally actually urging DSD to immediately pay the ECD workers who are still waiting for the stimulus relief funds. And this form of advocacy was done via direct emails and letter writing and engaging with government, as well as media exposure through print, radio, TV, and social media platforms. The sector also embarked on a 3-day national protest, and the images before you on your screen, this shows some of the protest action that occurred across South Africa, urging DSD to pay ECD workers immediately. Next slide. And then CECD has also been involved in the Children's Amendment Bill, and that process that's sitting in Parliament. We made written and oral submissions to the department, to the Portfolio Committee on Social Development on the Children's Amendment Bill, and as it relates to early childhood development. CECD also hosted 8 bill literacy workshops in partnership with the Real Reform for ECD campaign. And the pictures before you are a few images from the bill literacy workshop we hosted with the Real Reform for ECD campaign. Thank you, Jess. So since CECD's Advocacy and Social Justice Unit is a long-term initiative, the campaigns and advocacy work we do will vary and will definitely depend on specific reactive advocacy required at a certain time. But in terms of proactive or planned advocacy work, there are many campaigns that could be initiated, but our initial focus will be on registration issues at a municipal level, making ECD a local government election issue. We'll be looking at ECD workforce salaries, importantly, and conditions of service. And then on the 13th and 14th of July this year, the South African Research Association for Early Childhood Education, in partnership with CECD, is hosting their 4th National ECD Conference. And then a bit later this year, CECD will also be submitting a paper for the South African Journal on Human Rights special issue on early childhood development. Thank you. Jess, over to you.
Thanks, Yusra. So that was just a brief overview of the work that the unit is currently doing. And just to say that if you would like to follow the work that the unit does or to be part of our campaigns and for more information, please have a look at our webpage. The link is up on the slide, and then you can also follow us on Twitter at CECD_online, as well as on our Facebook page. And I will just stop sharing my screen. So Eric and Yusra, if you can both join me with your videos on for the Q&A section, please. Just waiting for Eric. Okay, But yeah, please, if you do have questions, please pop them in the chat and we will have a look at them. While we're waiting for Eric to join, Yusra, if I can pose this question to you in the meantime. It's a question from Marley Samuels, and she says, some of the work that you're doing is already being done by the Equal Education Law Centre. How are you going to ensure collaboration and not competition in the area of ECD?
Yes, thanks, Marie-Louise. That's a very good question. I think that's the main thing, is that firstly, there's so much to do, so there's no reason to duplicate and there's no reason for competition. We should be able to amplify each other's voices and collaborate and assist each other. So we do have a good relationship with the Equal Education Law Centre. And so in terms of actually planning strategies or campaigns around specific issues, part of the plan is to reach out to various organizations that we know are in the field, as well as then the sector, to get a sense of what is happening so that we can either assist and support and provide more help, or if it's something we can take on board, and to keep people also in the loop and to get input. So definitely agree on collaboration and not competition at all.
Eric, I don't know, before I go on to the next question, if you have anything to add to that. So Marie-Louise was asking how we're going to ensure collaboration and not competition in the area of ECD.
Well, the proof is in the pudding. If you look at what's happened since mid-2020, it's been a phenomenal collaborative effort at all levels. And I was pleasantly surprised when in the first protest, we got something like 15,000 people out on the streets. Now that was clearly collective. One organization cannot do that. There's a lovely network of about 50 people on an ECD discussion group, 50 leaders in the ECD sector, and many are on this webinar. So yes, nobody can do it alone.
Thanks, Eric. So Eric, there was a comment, but I think I'm also going to, and a question from Jill. And so Jill was saying, Eric has always said that we should unionize the sector. Yeah, Eric, any more thoughts on that?
The estimates of the number of ECD workers is around 180,000. I think the major education union, SATU, has missed a great opportunity to recruit those 180,000 people. If there's some young person with entrepreneurial flair, I think one of the best things that could be done is to unionize ECD workers, because they are treated appallingly. There's not even a sectoral determination protecting them. I did a study with a group of honors students for the past 2 years, and South Africa has a national minimum wage of 3,500 Rand a month. If you're earning 3,500 Rand a month as an ECD worker, you are in the upper 20% of income earners. So unionization is the only way to get real political power.
Thanks, Eric. So another question maybe for you, Eric, and then Yusra to add on, is from Guy Harris, and he is asking, how do we make sure that Treasury and Parliament funds ECD effectively? That's a question.
Guy, thank you for that. And you've been very helpful and instrumental in strengthening those Treasury links. I sense a greater willingness of Treasury to speak to the ECD sector than I do from National Social Development. And we've established good relationships, as have other people, with National Treasury. There's been a total hiding of information around the ECD stimulus package by Social Development. But National Treasury has been informing us about what's going on, particularly around money that has been either sent back to National Treasury or which is being held in provincial treasuries but cannot be spent. But with Guy's help, we need to make those relationships with National Treasury even stronger. They seem pretty reasonable. There are people who've got ECD in their heart. They're just not getting the buy-in from the National Social Development Department. Marley Samuels will be pleased to hear that I think the movement from social development to basic education could work really, really, really well if it's done properly, because I think there's a far greater understanding of early childhood development in basic education compared to what is in social development.
Eric, if I can just add on to that. So Guy asked another question which links directly to what you've said. And Guy's asking, how do we make sure that the transfer of ECD from the Department of Social Development to basic education does not result in many dropped balls? It is a key for the development of our future employees, customers, and neighbors.
Look, there will be dropped balls. It's a mammoth task. The bureaucracy and the logistics is huge. The first deadline of 1 April 2021 has clearly been missed. And the new deadline is 1st April 2022. I think if we get it done by then, it'll be a miracle, given that we're battling COVID and it looks as though we're going to go to level 4 and maybe even level 5 in some provinces. So I'm very hopeful. People have asked me about the migration. Is it a good thing? Is it a bad thing? Firstly, it's too early to tell, but if handled properly, it could be, I think, a very, very positive move. And Marley Samuels must use her experience to make the facilitation much easier. And everybody else, Pam Picken is on this webinar. She must use her experience to advise how that migration happens.
And then Jess, if I may just add on Guy Harris's question on how do we ensure that Treasury and Parliament effectively funds the ECD sector, I agree with Eric about developing relationships that sit in Treasury and Parliament that deal with sort of the budgetary process, and then us also understanding the budget process and knowing that as part of that process, there is opportunity for the public to comment on the budget that sets forward for the next year. And Guy Harris has assisted us in that respect, as in last year we could actually make submissions and call on National Treasury and Parliament to put more funds towards ECD and why it's so important. So knowing when to act and how to act within the government process as well.
Thanks, Yusra and Eric. I'm sorry, my internet keeps kicking me out for some reason. So if I'm disappear, I will rejoin again. But to Yusra and Eric, if that does happen, just have a look at the chat. But hopefully not. So there's another question from Julie Hay, which is, what do you need from us as small organizations to support advocacy, more than just following, sharing, and participating in the social media process that we've been doing in the past year? Eric, would you like to take that?
Yeah, Julie, that's a great comment. And if we can multiply that by every single ECD center in the country, and our estimates are that there are about 32,000, although data on the ECD sector is notoriously inaccurate. I think everybody's got a role to play. And this is now the beginning of a structured advocacy and social justice initiative. So we're still finding our feet. We're basing our movement forward on the successes of the past 12 months. But if I look at the ECD discussion group that's going around and at the 47 participants on this webinar, there's a huge amount of talent, experience, and goodwill. So watch this space as President Ramaphosa is fond of saying. We will get round to it. Keep in touch with us. Go to our website. We're on Twitter. I've got young people who are technologically very savvy. They communicate. And thank you for your offer to help.
Yusra, do you have anything you'd like to add to that?
Sure. So to basically just echo exactly what Eric said, is we're learning as we're going, but that's a really good question to raise, Julie, here, and for us to keep in mind. And then perhaps on our website, we'll bear that in mind on how to actually get further action or support from organizations, and how you can help depending on how strategies get developed, and it could even be requiring input. So thank you for that question.
Just to say to Guy, I saw your message on the chat, so I posted the link to the webpage, and we will be sharing, we can definitely share the slides from today's presentation with everybody. Hasina, I see, sorry, Eric?
No, there are two hands up.
I can't actually see the hands at the moment, but if you would like to pop your question into the chat, Hasina, then we can answer the question for you.
It's Jessica, it's Colleen Horswell Daniels and Hasina, both who are absolute stars and icons in the early childhood development sector. And I'm too petrified not to allow them to talk. They will, both Colleen and Hasina will hammer me. Yeah.
Okay, Hasina, would you like to ask a quick question? Go for it.
Thank you very much, Jess and Eric. Eric, thank you very much for picking up on all the advocacy, and I can see you really moving full steam ahead. And that is what we need at this historical point. I think the complacency has been to our detriment. There are two things I want to raise. The one is, and you've already raised this about certain activists being complicit with government and then becoming bedfellows. So my question to you is, number one, how do you negotiate the insider-outsider tension that you have when you're doing advocacy work? So you want to be inside because you want to influence inside, and then you want to stand outside so that you can show the areas for reform, amongst other things. So that's one. And then my second question is that we're now going to at the brink of starting the new diploma and degree in early childhood. And you're aware of the publication and gave us very good reviews on this here. Our conceptualization is to develop teachers that are change agents. What advice do you have in order to make them activists and champions for early childhood? Thank you very much.
Hasina, that was a great question. Thank you so much.
Hasina, the insider-outsider tension is a very serious one. But from experience, I found that those insiders are so frustrated that social development does not listen to them. I'll give you 2 or 3 examples. When the regulations under the National Disaster Act was drawn up, social development produced a 61-page set of regulations. The insiders were furious that they were not being heard. And the more they indicated this, the more they were ignored. There's a body called the Intersectoral Forum. And what's been happening is, whilst these forums are in session, I've been getting phone calls, messages from people in the meeting asking what to do, because you've got an intransigent Department of Social Development with people who are not competent. I think under basic education, it will be much better. I think insiders, my experience of insiders in basic education, and we look at white paper 5, we look at the various grade R initiatives when government listened. And so I think that the tension is that those insiders need to be firm, they need to be strong, they must not be captured. And I think a lot of insiders are scared that if they counter government, they will lose funding. Well, there's no funding in the first place for non-profits from social development. It is a tension, and I think those insiders, it's important to have them there, but they really need to stand their ground. And to quote Professor Kada Asmal again, it's those who make a noise who get listened to. On the development of teachers and as activists, I think that's one of the big tasks that the sector has got, is to show people that they have power, they have political power. We've seen it via 2 court cases, and we're seeing it now via the denial of the vaccination to ECD workers who are not in basic education. We've already got the Gauteng Social Development Department rethinking, and it seems as though they're going to be including ECD teachers that fall under social development in the vaccination rollout, which in fact starts today for teachers. So that's all part of the battle, and you are, I think, perfectly placed with your credibility and your global positions to be a force in that regard.
Thanks, Eric. Yusra, do you want to add anything? And then we'll go to Colleen and then to Pam.
Sure. So just to add on the second question raised by Hasina about developing teachers who are activists, I think I agree with what Eric has said. And in addition, another thing that has come out is that knowledge is power. So one way to bring out activism is for people to know their rights and to know what they can do. And that's what we experienced quite remarkably with the Bull Literacy workshops, when going out into the community, explaining what the process is, explaining how it can change their lives, and then how they can actually make change. We had such positive response to people wanting to be part of the provincial hearings and going there themselves. And so that's all part of, popular education, rights education, for people to know their rights, know how to get involved, and so that they aren't afraid, and knowing that it is a democratic right to stand up and demand certain treatment. So yeah, that's my 2 cents. Thanks, Jess.
Thanks, Yusra. Colleen, you're welcome to ask your question.
Okay, good afternoon to everybody. I'm just a humble ECD worker in a community, and I just want to mention that many years ago we spoke about the necessity of the ECD sector becoming unionized, and I see the point has been raised again. What scares me about this is that if we understand that people in the rural areas or in the poor communities, they charge like 50 Rand per child, or maybe 20 Rand per child per month. So if we unionize the sector, which would be brilliant for everybody, how does this impact the fact of the salaries? Because I think when one looks at the National Development Plan, Trevor mentioned that he asked Treasury to look at paying ECD salaries in 2030. Now, can the ECD sector wait until 2030 for an uncaring government to make a provision for ECD salaries? Because then the unions can unionize us, because then we would be able to make demands on government. Or am I missing the point here? The second one is that I just also like to allude to what Hasina said about developing ECD workers. And I attended the peace workshop about 2 weeks ago, and I was horrified to hear that discussions were held with many provinces but the Western Cape did not participate. And that for me was, do they not regard ECD as relevant? Because when one speaks in the communities about the new qualifications that are coming out, I'm always telling people that the NATED N4, 5, and 6, it doesn't give any entrance into a B.Ed or for you to be able to work at a school. So why are the TVET colleges still rolling it out? We have our learnerships level 4, level 5, diploma level 5. So how does that develop into an ECC diploma or I don't know if it's a certificate or diploma or degree, but how do we then mobilize to develop all the teachers that are currently working in ECD sites with a level 4, level 5? So we do have a mammoth task, and I'm excited about this process that Eric and his team has put on the table, and they have my support 100% in any way that I can support. I'm not sure if I'm throwing in curved balls or if I've made myself clear, but it's basically just some things that are on my heart. And, you know, if we could just have some clarity on that. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Colleen. I missed some of your questions because I got kicked out again, but I'm sure Eric and Yusra will be able to answer.
Jessica, can I suggest that you take Pam's question now, because we're coming close to 1 o'clock, and then
Yes,
we handle all three in one go.
Definitely, great idea. I was going to say Pam will probably have to be our last question because we do just need to be aware of the time. So Pam, go ahead and ask your question, and then Yusra and Eric can cover all the questions at the same time.
Hi, everybody. And firstly, congratulations to CECD on this initiative. I, never waste a good crisis. And now there are so many crises affecting early childhood practitioners and the sector that it's an ideal time for advocacy and to unify the sector. My question to you is, the sector is very disparate, it's very diverse, it's spread out, it's difficult to reach. While it's quite well organized in the Western Cape, trying to reach practitioners in deep rural and Mpumalanga and KZN and so on is not easy. So a union, while it's a good idea, it's a challenge. It's going to take time to happen. How are we going to mobilize and unite the sector with a common voice? And they are scared to challenge DSD, especially those that are either getting subsidies or hoping to get subsidies. They're frightened to raise their voices. And when you think how much time and effort went into getting 15,000 people to protest in the greater scheme of 180,000, it's a big task that lies ahead. Thanks.
Thanks, Pam. And just maybe to also add on from the chat on that topic, Marie-Louise has also said the unionization of the ECD sector is complicated in that the majority of the workers are at private/community-based centers.
Jessica, do you want me to go? I'm just going to talk because a lot of points have come up, and this is not a problem-solving webinar. It's an ideas webinar, and as Marie-Louise said, and as Pam has said, many of these issues are complex, they are lengthy, and they require deep thinking. Colleen, one of the things you would have seen from Yusra's PowerPoint is that we have to make salaries and conditions of service an issue and an urgent issue. And we've got that on our timeline to start in the next short while. The salaries that ECD workers earn and the conditions of service are horrific. So we have to pick up on that. On the training and that you mentioned, I think what we could do is we've got a lot of expertise. There are people on this webinar who have huge historical knowledge, but also present day knowledge and thinking about the future. And we could start a training campaign or strand under the leadership of one of the people on this webinar. But we certainly have to get the whole training situation sorted out. You know, government put out a teacher development strategy years ago, and early childhood development was not mentioned in there at all. Now, that predated the possible migration, and it's time to revisit that. Pam, yes, the country is spread out. They are difficult to reach ECD centers, and people in rural areas are intimidated. I think the non-profits, and there are about 80 or so, have got a pretty good reach, with the exception of Northwest and the Northern Cape, which is a vast area. And we have to get these messages out to those areas as well. I would take a bit of an issue with Pam on how do we get a common voice? I think common voices are dangerous. What if those voices are misguided? In a democracy, contestation of ideas moves us forward. And we've seen where common voices, particularly in the political sphere, leads us to a dead end. I think this issue about we have to unite the ECD field is also a myth. The ECD field is united. I think government and donors often use that as a tactic to absolve themselves of responsibility. If we can get 15,000 people out on the streets twice at short notice with no resources, I think the sector is largely united. Differing opinions does not mean that the sector is not united. I would be really scared if everybody had the same opinion, because if that's the case, then there are too many people in that group. As I think it was Jonathan Jansen who said, if everybody in your team agrees, then you've got too many people in your team.
Thanks, Eric. Yes, Rick, would you like to have any last comments before we end off?
Thanks, Jess. No, I think Eric covered everything, so I have nothing more to add on those questions.
Great, thank you. I'm just going to be putting in the chat for anybody, because we will bring this event to a close now, but for anybody who feels like we weren't able to answer the questions, or if we've just run out of time, you are welcome to email those questions through to us at the email address ccd@iafrica.com. But just to say thank you again to Jacques and to Inyatero for hosting and for your technical support for this event. We really do appreciate it. Thank you so much. And to say
Great pleasure.
to everybody who's here today. Thanks, Jacques. To say thank you to everybody who's here attending this event with us. Thank you so much for taking time out of your busy days to be here. And we are just so excited and thrilled to be able to share this work with you all. And then just to say that we look forward to working with everybody to really support and strengthen the ECD sector through our advocacy and social justice work. Yeah, thank you everybody. Keep well, stay safe, and have a wonderful rest of your day. Thank you so much.